What's poppin', people? It's Dante. This morning I wanted to look at some of the photographs I made in Tokyo, Japan, shooting on the streets with the Ricoh GR IIIx and the 71mm built-in crop mode in the camera. And so I'm going to show you some of the photographs, just like kind of sporadically go through them and candidly talk about the process, because this was exactly the technique that I broke through using on the street, very much accidentally and spontaneously, that I'm really intrigued by. And maybe by talking about these photos out loud and sharing with you the reason why I photograph this way and breaking down the exact technique and the nitty-gritty details on how to achieve these results, we can all thrive together and sort of build upon this language and maybe push forward using the exact technique that I adopted on the streets to create more interesting photos on the street. And so I think that with these kind of images, what's most interesting is the way that light and shadow etch, shape, and form into the faces of the people that I'm photographing by using the beautiful golden light and finding myself in a tunnel, finding myself in a street where there is beautiful light and a simple backdrop of shadow area. I'm able to isolate subjects from the chaotic environment of the street itself. And so essentially, when I was making these photographs, I first began experimenting at the Shinjuku station, where at Shinjuku station, it's one of the most bustling places in the city where there's just constant flow of traffic. And so I would find myself, just waiting outside of the station entrance and just watching as people come in and out of the light. And because it's so chaotic, it's very difficult to put order to chaos. But by using the 71mm built-in crop mode in the Ricoh GR IIIx, I was able to get extremely close to the faces of the people that just genuinely intrigued me. Like for me, I was very much interested in the faces of the people of Tokyo. I found the people to be extremely beautiful, and I was curious about light and shadow play and how that could interact at the scenes that I was shooting in order to elevate something mundane to something a little bit more extraordinary. And I think that through light that we can achieve this goal of making something from nothing, because the way the light is always changing and is always flowing at different times of day, during different seasons and different locations, will always be changing and will never be the same. And so the way in which people interact with light and shadow play intrigue me simply due to the fact that I remind myself that you cannot make the same photograph twice. Just for the simple fact that the way the light is casting upon the world is always in flux and always moving and quite out of our control, right? But that's how I want to be when I'm on the street, sort of entering that flow of traffic and movement and sort of allowing the spontaneity, allowing the differences of the light and the way that it's always moving and changing to elevate the frames that I make. And so with this technique, it's very simple. I'm essentially finding myself in a bustling place where there's so many people and so much chaos so that I can make pictures in a very easy way by getting close to people and not really disturbing the scene. And so as I was shooting here in the streets of particularly Shinjuku Station or Shibuya, I would make sure to have the sun to my back or have the sun perpendicular to me to the side, where I essentially was trying to look for those interesting moments where the people's faces were revealed in the light. Maybe like in this frame, the woman's eye is simply revealed and the rest of the frame is mostly crushed in shadow area. And so with the particular technique that I'm using 71mm crop mode, I have the camera's crop mode button set to the side of the Ricoh GR IIIx where the video icon is located. And so you click the button 2 times, you're cropped in. I would set my snap focus to 1 meter. And then from there, I would essentially just point and shoot. I had the camera set to manual mode with the 1/2000th of a second at f16, highlight weighted metering mode with my JPEG settings using high contrast black and white cranked to the max. And so all of the contrast, the grit, and the grain is baked into the camera using automatic ISO in order for me to create these photographs with speed. And so these exact settings are what I use to achieve these results, using the snap focus at 1 meter and using the aperture at f16, 1/2000th of a second, for me to very quickly put the camera as close as possible to the faces of the people with speed in order to freeze the action as people are moving into the frame. And so at the Shibuya Crossing, this is one of the most photographed places in the world. This is one of the most bustling places in the world, where there's thousands of people moving in and out of the crossing every single moment, it seems. And so it was the perfect place to make these kind of frames. And so if you're looking to make these kind of photos, I don't necessarily think you need to be in the most bustling place, but it certainly helps in order to increase the likelihood of things occurring. Where, for instance, what I'm interested in when I'm shooting these kind of photos is not only the faces of the people, but the way in which light and the way in which the people can overlap and interact. And so as you can see in this frame, of course I have this boy here in the foreground, but what was very interesting about this technique that I was trying to achieve was the way in which people could overlap on the street, where we have this man's face on the bottom right-hand side of the frame, very much mysteriously just appearing sort of in the bottom corner, where these kind of interactions between the foreground and the background are also something that I was very much interested in and trying to achieve on the street. But it was very much spontaneous and out of my control. The only thing that I think that you're really in control of as a photographer is where you position your physical body in relationship to the subject, the background, and when you click the shutter. And so you have an understanding of where the light is. You have an understanding of where the chaos and the people are. And then you simply position yourself in relationship to these things and sort of try to solve the visual puzzle. And so as I'm looking at life and people are coming into my frame, I'm trying to arrange my body in a way where I can see the face in the foreground and I can see the relationships that are happening in the background, and then trying to put order to the chaos in my frames by making these simple relationships intuitively. And so with these frames, I was trying to experiment with not only having the sun directly to my back, but also experimenting with the way in which the light was interacting from a different angle, sometimes looking towards the sun in order to create these more highlighted effects of the sides of people's faces that I thought were even more interesting. And so with light and shadow play, you can really elevate the mundane to a new height by making pictures of these simple scenes of simple faces, simple gestures, and really transforming life through light. And I think this is a really beautiful technique to put under your tool belt so that when you're out on the streets, you can start to see differently. Because that's essentially what happened with me on this sort of trip here, is I started to see differently. I started to observe life differently, simply due to the fact that I had this new focal length built into my camera, simply due to the fact that now I had this ability to get extremely close to people's faces and to details and different things. This is something that I've never thought about doing on the streets, but when I arrived at the Shibuya Crossing and I realized how chaotic the scene was, this was the solution to the problem of the chaos of Shibuya. And so I found that by returning time and time again and practicing this technique, I was able to really chip away at this approach and make pictures that were starting to pique my curiosity. And I was very much curious about the way that the gazes of the people and the gestures of the people interacted with light, and how these very small slivers of light and these very small details became elevated in my frames. And so by positioning myself in relationship to the subjects in the light, with a shadow area in the background, I was able to achieve this technique of having the subjects isolated in the frame, sort of floating in this ambiguous space. And so this notion of ambiguity is very interesting to me as a photographer who is working on the streets and making candid pictures, where a lot of the times we're very caught up with making a picture that has the sort of scene or the sort of like landscape or the environment or the place or the subject itself being the most interesting thing in the frame, where you have to travel far to get these kind of pictures to make a strong street photo. But realistically, I think that the ambiguity of a frame becomes much more interesting, where with this particular frame, you couldn't tell me where I made this picture. I could have made this picture in my backyard. I could have made this picture anywhere in the world. I mean, that to me is the beauty of this technique of using light and shadow play and isolating people's faces in the frame, is that the face and the light is really all you need. And I mean, it's really simple. You can do this anywhere in the streets. You don't have to go far and wide to Tokyo. And so that's why I love that I found this technique of making these photographs with more ambiguity, because that ambiguous nature of these frames, I think, is what makes it most interesting, is that it's very much mundane. It's not necessarily so interesting. I'm not dependent upon the content within the frame, but I'm simply using light and I'm using the faces of the people to elevate the mundane nature of life to a new height. And so with this particular frame, what's most interesting is this negative space. And so I was really curious about the way that negative space and that deep black shadow area could elevate the simple gestures of people's faces in the frame. And so you can see here this man's face on the right hand side revealed in a very small portion of the frame. And so I'm playing and tinkering with the black negative space and highlighting the people in the frames and giving these sort of shapes and forms and etchings to the people's faces, almost like these sort of Japanese woodblock black and white prints. Here we have this small sliver of glare on the man's sort of glasses there that I think is a bit interesting. And so essentially when you're making pictures on the streets, ask yourself this one simple fundamental question: what will reality manifest to be in a photograph today? And essentially what that means is when you're out there and you're photographing, and specifically when you're using this particular technique with my JPEG recipe and you're shooting with high contrast black and white with the Ricoh GR3 or the Ricoh GR IIIx in the streets, and you're using light and shadow play and you're photographing in this particular way, a lot of the times what you see in the photograph isn't necessarily, like when you're photographing you think, oh, you take a picture, what you see is what you get. But really the idea is when you photograph something, what you get is what you didn't see. It's interesting. It's essentially what the camera saw. It's sort of like when you're taking a picture, you're looking beyond reality. You're looking beyond the veil, and the things that you photograph wind up surprising you. It's not necessarily something you recognized with your naked eye initially. You kind of sense the possibility of something occurring, and then as you chip away at life and start to make photos, these sort of magical moments reveal themselves in the frames that you make. And so I think that to me is the interesting sort of notion to consider when practicing street photography, specifically with this technique especially, where there's something to be said about the way in which life is rendered through the camera, where you're not necessarily photographing life as it is, but what it could be through abstracting reality. And so that's what I try to achieve by using this technique, is making more abstract pictures that are ambiguous, that are mundane, but also interesting just simply due to the way that light elevates these different scenes. And so that's the idea with this sort of technique. It's sort of just finding yourself immersed in the chaos and being in the streets and just recognizing the faces, recognizing the patterns in nature and human behavior, studying the light, studying the way the light falls, studying the movement of the people, their gestures, studying where the people are going to be, where is the chaos going to be today, and then putting yourself in that place and playing in the light and photographing as people come into your frame. It's a very simple way to think about this thing with street photography. You simply have to be aware of the light, aware of the people, and then position yourself in the right place at that right time and have an understanding of how you can make these different relationships between the light, between the gestures, and then elevate those moments in a photograph. And so by using the 71mm crop mode in my Ricoh GR IIIx, I was able to experiment with these sort of high contrast, gritty, sort of facial sort of like abstract pictures that maybe go beyond the simple notion of just traditional documentary sort of street photography, right? Which I think is maybe an interesting direction to push. And so that's what I was trying to kind of subconsciously do while on this trip in Tokyo, was experiment with my technique more, experiment with not necessarily making just pure documentary photographs, as that's something I've always done in my life. And so, yeah, with this trip in particular, I was trying to push myself to experiment, to explore, and to make mistakes and to tinker. And, you know, the funny thing about this technique is I discovered it through a mistake. You know, I discovered this technique through me being on the streets of Shibuya and accidentally hitting the crop mode button. And then I looked at my LCD screen and I said, wait a minute, I can use this technique I can use this technique intentionally. And so I started to do that, and I became obsessed with that. And I simply followed my instincts. I followed that instinct, that obsession, and that obsession is what guided me. I wasn't necessarily rationally thinking, this is so great, I need to keep following this technique, this is going to be, the best thing ever. I was simply obsessed with the crowd. I was obsessed with the light, and I found myself in this sort of addictive state of being where I kept returning to the same street every single day, trying to make something with this technique. And so I couldn't stop myself from going back to this location, and I followed that instinct, I followed that intuition that guided me, and just simply responded to my gut as people entered my frame, and raised my camera high very quickly and closely to the people's faces, and pressed the shutter at that decisive moment where the snap focus is set to 1 meter, allowing myself to get close in proximity with the sort of small compact digital camera to then make these kind of frames. And so I'm looking at not only the faces and the individual subjects and trying to isolate them, but I'm also trying to emphasize through the compression the chaos of this environment and layer people from the foreground, middle ground, and background. And so these frames, were interesting because of the way in which people overlapped could become a little bit spontaneous, right? With this frame here, you can see the man's hand near his mouth in relationship to that hand and the mouth in the background. That was very spontaneous, not something I could necessarily see with my naked eye, but by positioning myself in a chaotic environment where there's lots of overlap and different people interacting, something spontaneous could occur, something beyond what my naked eye could see. And that's what I was trying to achieve on the street with this particular technique. And through returning with repetition time and time again and trying over and over again to make pictures with this technique, I was really pleasantly surprised because eventually I found the frame that I was trying to make. There's something to be said about having the sort of spontaneity guide you, not necessarily trying to control everything, right? Where I have light and it's out of my control. I have the chaos of the people, they're out of my control. But being in that place where you have the ability to recognize the light, recognize the people, and have the sort of sense of a possibility of something occurring, and just trying over and over again with intention and intensity, and then eventually making something that piques your curiosity, where this frame here I think was my favorite frame of this trip for this particular technique, where we have the sort of shape of the light interacting with this man's face in the foreground in relationship to the eye that's revealed in the background. And so there's that interesting dynamic between the eye that's revealed and the mouth that's revealed, and how the man in the foreground's face is hidden and in relationship to the eye that's revealed in the background. And this very simple overlap, this very simple compression of two different faces interacting in this space that's ambiguous, and you can't really put a location or a place or a name to these subjects. They're anonymous. This photo is ambiguous, it's abstract. We have the light and shadow play. We have simple gestures of a mouth, a nose, and an eye, and the light, with this crushed deep black background. This kind of moment is essentially what I was hoping to come home with at the end of the day, something like this where there's a combination of gestures, there's the interesting shapes that are formed from the light, and just the way that the people overlapped was very spontaneous and different, and something I couldn't necessarily control, but had an understanding of this possibility occurring, if that makes sense. And so I would simply, while walking the streets, always have the Ricoh GR IIIx on me with the crop mode built into the camera immediately. So I had the crop mode on my neck, snap focus 1 meter, all of the settings built in, and I would essentially have the Ricoh GR III with the 28mm on my wrist. And so I was dual wielding my cameras. So when I came to a scene like this where I wanted to work this particular technique, I would simply hold the Ricoh GR IIIx from my neck and work the scene. And then if I wanted to switch back to traditional sort of documentary style photos, I would switch to my 28mm on my wrist. And so this was a really beautiful technique to adopt, using both Ricoh GR III and Ricoh GR IIIx. Sort of dual wielding this camera system was a pleasant surprise for me as somebody who usually uses one camera, one lens. And I'm really glad that I did so, because it allowed me to sort of experiment and push with this new technique. And so I think the moral of the story is to follow your obsession, follow your instinct, and follow your gut. Because for me on this trip, I did so. And when I did so, I wound up coming home with this sort of creative breakthrough, where this technique and these kind of photos are something I could never imagine me doing. I could never imagine me doing this intentionally, other than if I were to sort of just spontaneously start trying things, right? And so experimentation, sort of making mistakes and imperfections, and then like rolling with it and like sort of adopting and iterating and trying to go back time and time again, proved to be a really good thing for me, especially even on this trip where, I have only 13 days to make photographs in this new place. I want to make sure that I'm, kind of like trying to, be out there with consistency and making pictures that are interesting. But I wound up actually just saying, fuck it. Like, I'm just going to start experimenting. And through the experimentation and not taking my photography so seriously, and kind of honestly just being detached from the outcome of the results of the photos, whether or not I'm going to make a good or bad photo, but just following the obsession and the instinct to continuously press the shutter and follow this particular technique because it just felt good in the moment. Like there's something about like the bodily sensation, right? Where like my body was telling me to go back to the Go back to the crossing, go back to the chaos, go back to the light, follow that instinct, look at the way the light casts upon this place, look at the chaos of the people. And like my body just like naturally gravitated back to this location time and time again, where I just kept pushing this technique out of an obsessive quality, out of an instinct, not necessarily thinking rationally whatsoever about the outcome of the photographs and what they mean, whether or not this is or is not street photography, whether or not these photos will receive praise or validation. I was simply making these pictures because they were simply piquing my inner curiosity. And so I think when you find something that piques your curiosity, that you should follow that instinct and follow that inner curiosity. Because for me as a street photographer, my goal is very simple. It's not to make good or bad photos, but it's simply to increase my curiosity by 1% each day. And so by making pictures this way, my curiosity was increasing, needless to say. And that's why you see so many frames on the screen. That's why you see me talking about this so passionately, and why I kept going back out there and trying to make these kind of pictures. It was simply due to the fact that it was piquing my inner curiosity, where not only was I trying to isolate subjects from the background and isolate single moments and gestures, but once again trying to emphasize the different kind of ways that people can overlap in the frame with all of the chaos at the scene. So we have in this picture lots of different people throughout the frame that came together very much spontaneously, but is something I was aware of occurring due to the fact that there is just so many people. The light is beautiful, and if I position myself here and try again and again, I can put order to the chaos and have many different subjects appear throughout the frame. And so with that, I think we have a wrap. I'm pretty sure this was around the end of my journey trying this technique, really experimenting on this trip with the 71 millimeter crop. If you're curious about the exact sort of outcome of the file, which may be interesting to you, if you look here at the result, 71 millimeter crop, I'm shooting with a small JPEG file, so when you use the 71 millimeter crop mode, it winds up being 3.1 megabytes, it seems. You can see my camera settings, 1/2000th of a second, f16, 71 millimeter crop, automatic ISO, EV at 0. And so these are the exact settings. That's the exact sort of file information if you're curious about that kind of thing. And so yeah, the best time to make these kind of pictures is obviously going to be during the golden light, whether it's in the sunrise or the sunset. I particularly was shooting around the sunset. You can see the exact date, November 28th, photographing at around 2:20 p.m. So I would be shooting from around maybe 1:30 to 3, using this technique, 1:30 to 2:30, 1:30 to 3, maybe 2 to 3, like just for like an hour, a little bit over an hour essentially. During this sort of time of the year in Tokyo, it seems that the light hits this location at Shibuya Crossing perfectly. And yeah, I'm really curious about the results in these frames, and I think that's ultimately what I'm all about, is just sort of following that curiosity, following that instinct, and not really thinking too rationally about what it means, but just sort of experimenting and pushing on this trip really provided me with this creative breakthrough that I'm really happy to share with you, and also bring home to adopt in my technique on the street here in Philadelphia, in my hometown, and sort of try to push the boundaries with my own personal photography. So yeah, that's the thought of the day, just looking at some of the photos I made in this particular way using 71 millimeter crop mode on the Ricoh GR IIIx. I can show you here on the screen my camera systems. I've got the Ricoh GR III here, and then the Ricoh GR IIIx I use on the neck. So I would have this on my neck with this Ricoh strap, and then I have here on the wrist this Ricoh wrist strap, the leather wrist strap. So I would have both cameras operating at one time. And then on the side of the camera, we have here the Wi-Fi button, the video button. I click that 2 times and you get into the 71 millimeter crop mode. And so that's the exact workflow that I use. And if you're also curious about my camera settings and how I make pictures on the streets, I have a guide on my website at dantesisifo.com. If you click the books tab, you can find the ultimate Ricoh GR street photography guide. I break down my exact settings, my technique, my philosophy in this video here. I give you a little bit of an in-depth guide with a PDF that you can download if you click on that image, and there's a table of contents where I can click and open up my camera settings, and so you can see my exact camera settings if you want to go into the nitty-gritty details about how I set my camera up to shoot high contrast black and white on the streets. I give you my exact recipe with the sort of image quality quality settings here with my JPEG recipe, with the exact details on what I use on the streets, with my exposure settings and with everything in between, from the technique to the settings, the philosophy, and everything in between, once again. So yeah, check this out if you're curious about even my button layout. I share with you my exact button layout. We have screenshots behind the scenes of my Ricoh settings and how I set up the display and all the different things in the Ricoh technically. And then I go into some of the techniques and the philosophy and even the way in which I shoot on the streets. And so one last thing before this video wraps up, I wound up picking up a very interesting book, which is called First Abandon the World of Certainty, which is essentially Provoke 4 through 5. And I have it here in my hand. You can see on my little webcam here. It's this book here, which is like a missing piece to the Provoke series. And we have in this book a lot of text. You know, it's a lot of Japanese text, a lot of Japanese photography philosophy, which is extremely in-depth and extremely interesting. The problem is this isn't available online anywhere until today. I put together the resource for you. I spent some time tediously transcribing the entirety of the book, and so I provide on this post on my blog here, and I even put it on my Start Here page. So if you want to find it, you can find it there, or scroll down to the description of this video, and I will provide the link to the Provoke materials. I don't have every image archived in this sort of archive here. I do, however, have 2 flip-throughs. If you click on these links, like, it'll open this up and you can see I have actually photos of every single spread, every single image. So you can see every image in the Abandon the World. But both resources are flip through videos. And then of course, the most interesting thing though, I think about this resource is I provide for you the full English text. So I have a TXT file here that's formatted in Markdown code for you to download and do whatever you want with. But there's also a PDF here for you to use and read and enjoy. So this is the entirety of the Provoke 1 through 3 text material. It's about 53 pages. I have a video download, and I also provided an audio download for the Provoke materials where you can listen to a shitty terminal sort of like generated audio of the read through of the text. If you don't feel like reading it, it's like an hour and 20 minutes, or you can find a PDF reader online for you to use and sort of just plug this file in. That's what I would suggest. And so with the Abandon the World of Certainty, I have here the full PDF, and so this is open source, so feel free to download it, feel free to check my work, feel free to try this yourself. I provide here a PDF with 150 pages going through the entirety of the book, and so we have in-depth philosophy from the Provoke era of this sort of beautiful work called First Abandon the World of Certainty that I highly encourage you to go ahead and check out and download for yourself, and I even give you the PDF scan of the entire book. So with this PDF scan, I'm pretty sure that you can highlight and sort of copy. Yeah, see, look, you can copy and paste all the Japanese text. I could upload the Japanese text. I think I have it on my computer somewhere. I did just provide the English, but here's the full Japanese text. So maybe that's useful if you really want to check the work and see if the translation is correct and stuff like that. But ultimately, I provide with you, again, the sort of TXT file. I give you the sort of PDF file, and there's a video download. So everything's here. I think the missing piece would be finding a PDF reader for you to enjoy this work without having to look at a shitty PDF. I mean, if you like reading, that's cool too. You can even just print it out or whatever. But I have on my iPhone, I'll show you what I did. I downloaded this app called Voice Dream, and Voice Dream is an app that you have to pay for, but I essentially used the 7-day free trial, and then I went to my settings and I canceled the subscription. And so you can use this app called Voice Dream, and then I imported this file with the entire PDF, and essentially you can have an AI bot read it to you. And so I'm about 3 hours into the book so far, and you can hear it here.
Those who watch it on television were no less unable to escape it. It was painful, and yet they continued to watch. Such spectators inevitably tried to find some kind of salvation in the situation.
So this is only a 7-day free trial, but I'm sure there's ways that we can find to sort of enjoy this book in a PDF audiobook setting. There's also an app called Natural Reader, and this is also something you have to pay for, but I have the free version or something where you can simply have it imported, and I don't think you can use the audio. I think you hit a limit, but there is this AI tab where you can chat with this PDF document. So like I asked it, like, tell me everything discussed about @J in this book. And it gave me information about exactly in which page of the PDF they discuss @J, sort of like simple like questions you can ask, and they will respond in this sort of like AI using the natural reader application. And so I used Adobe Scan or Microsoft Lens to scan those PDF documents and create these sort of resources for you. And so I just wanted to announce that at the end of this video because I think it's really interesting to have this missing piece. Share it with your friends, share it with other photographers. Maybe they can find meaning in these sort of texts and enjoy them themselves, and maybe you will too. Maybe one day I could figure out how to use AI to generate an audio file using this book as a sort of resource. Maybe one of you is tech savvy and likes to make those kind of things. I don't really have that much time to do it, but if you want, you can take the audio file, or you can take the text file and maybe feed it to one of those AI services to create an audiobook of this text. That'd be amazing. And yeah, put it on YouTube or something. Yeah, and then if you wanted to see my full Tokyo street photography archive on my homepage or on my Start Here page, you can find my archive right here. I have a full slideshow with every single day of my trip in Tokyo archived, where you can see every single day I photographed. You can click on one of these links and it will show you all the different frames that I made on these particular days. And also all of my Tokyo videos, all of my Tokyo philosophy videos and more, all found here in this post on my homepage. And so everything's kind of like archived here with all my links to my YouTube videos. And I pretty much have nothing else to say. If you wanted to download all the photos, there is a link to download all of the photos via Google Photos. There's an archive link here. It's about 2.5 megabytes. And yeah, you can go ahead and check out all of the work in a Google Photos drive. And I'm pretty sure it should be accessible to hit that download all button here at the top right. If you hit those 3 dots, I know that it works for me. I did try to make it open and like free to share and free to download. So hopefully it works. If not, sorry, maybe there's still ways to download this shit if you wanted to, but yeah, you can download all the photos, everything open source, everything free. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just wanted to talk about this technique, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.